So, hi there, good afternoon. Thank you for postponing your lunch for me. Um, my name is Wouter, and today I want to talk to you about not postponing your lunch, because we've already done that. No, I want to talk to you about replacing your backlog with experiments. Before we get into the more practical details of that, let's have a little look at why we are working in the way that we're working. Who here is on team business? There is 3. Excellent. Who's on team development? There we go. This is an actual XP conference. I love it. Because when we all started with XP a long time ago, there was the team, and the team in XP was, as I say, a whole team. That meant that even though there was a business that was actually quite separate, as was usual, they got the on-site customer. So in the original XP team, they simply got someone who would actually use the system. They would sit in with the team, and she said her with the team, and she would be there to answer any questions that the developers had while working on the system. And that's great, because it gives you fast feedback. Oh, that was fast. But if we look at the way that works, for instance, in most Scrum teams, the product owner is not so much from the business as is a separate entity that sits between the team and the business. And there's good reasons for that. And in many situations, it's what you should be doing to be able to get your development team to work, right? For instance, Ron Jeffries, he was the Agile coach for that first XP team. He's very fond of saying that Agile was meant to make the world safe again for developers. And this is an artifact of that. In fact, what you do with Scrum and the roles as they are defined are such that you make sure that your development team can work without constant interruptions from the business, as many teams have found. Unfortunately, very often it devolves into something that is officially, I think, called a proxy PO, which means it's a product owner that doesn't really have any say in the business side of things, and is pretty much there as a manager between indeed the team and the rest of the organization. And well, as developers, I think that this very often devolves into something that I call the firewall PO, because they seem to stop everything going either way, any contact. And that is, again, in some organizations it's necessary, but you have to realize that it's a workaround, it's a hack. It's a hack you put in place because there are deep-seated problems in the organization, so which cause the development team not to be able to work together with the business. And what we're seeing happening currently is that people are starting to recognize that hack and are starting to work on an actual proper solution for the problem. Oh man. Hey, you may have seen him before today. He was my example of the firewall PO. I often work as a consultant, so I have to bother people with maturity models. And if you have to do that, then this one is actually a pretty useful one. And it demonstrates the process that I'm talking about. If you look at the Agile fluency model by James Shore and Diana Larsen, then you can see that they've given each level stars. The first level is just being able to work as a team together with a common purpose. And you can see that as the basic Scrum level. You actually have a backlog, and the whole team is working on the backlog and is somewhat working together on that. The second level, as they describe it, is where the team actually also is able to develop software at a very high level of quality and is able to deliver with a high quality as quickly as the market needs it to deliver. And this is where you find something like XP and things like continuous delivery. The level that comes after that, which they call optimized value, is where the team actually is consciously working to optimize their particular product and is being steered based on business value. Now, and we're going to discuss today how we can start the process of getting to that third level, which is something, as I said, that's happening more and more in the industry, but is still fairly new. Mary Poppendick gave a wonderful talk at the XP conference in Edinburgh in May, and this was one of the transitions that she identified, where you move from, as she calls it, the IT mindset, where we're a team basically building whatever the business wants us to build, and are mostly managed based on planning and on cost reduction, to a team that works in close cooperation with the business and using the same goals, and where we think about what is our investment for a certain feature, for instance, and what is our return on that. What she also mentioned is that even though Agile has been very well accepted in our industry, pretty much everyone is doing it, or at least saying that they're doing it. You can see that moving software engineering to a more to a profit center instead of a cost center is something that's still fairly new. And the people who created the Agile fluency model agree with this, and say that only about 5% of organizations at this point reach that level. So we're still at a fairly early stage of this. They also say it can take 5 years to get there, and that it's actually quite normal for that to happen. Unfortunately, I'm not really that patient. So what I want to talk about is how can we hack that system? How can we introduce this way of working from the bottom up? Yes, shortcuts. So it could be a good idea to maybe ask how you're dealing with those things right now. Who here knows the term MVP? Right. For who is that something that is not just the first milestone? Right. An MVP is supposed to be a test, a way to find out more information about whether the market will actually accept your product or your feature. And what we want to do is we want to move from a planning and milestone way of working more to an experimental way of working and seeing whether this particular feature will perhaps help us achieve a better conversion rate or something like that. The background of most of these, the examples that I have are from a project that I did a couple of years ago, and we had a team that was developing stuff. They were developing PHP. They had an e-commerce site, actually a job site, where you can look for new jobs. And they'd gone through a couple of steps in developing their skills, and they'd reached definitely that second level. They'd gone from releasing completely manual once every 2-3 weeks to releasing completely automated in a new infrastructure like 20 times a day. So they make a huge process in their development skills. And they were developing a new feature for the company, and the feature was basically building a new page that was faster and better than the previous one, the detail page for a specific job. And when they built this, it was in production. You could flick set a cookie, and you can flip the feature toggle, and you would be able to use the new page. And they showed it around, they showed it to the product owner, and they wanted to get this thing in the hands of users. Unfortunately, the product owner felt very uncomfortable about actually releasing this. I don't know if you've been in those situations, but especially if a team has not delivered very well for a long time and is improving, there's still not much trust from the business in doing those things. So they got to the strange situation where they very quickly delivered new functionality, and then 3 weeks later, still none of the users could actually use this. Sorry. Yeah. And as you can read from the quote from the continuous delivery book, it's all very nice to have things in production, but if you're not actually giving it to users, and if it's not actually delivering value, it's not done. And the team really felt that. So we started going into the discussion with the business and saying, okay, what can we do to calm your nerves about releasing this? They were afraid that, for instance, that the conversion rates would go down, or that they would get complaints about features that were not in the new page. And we wanted to get to a situation where they would feel comfortable enough to release it, so that we could find out what those things really were. And in the end, what we agreed upon was, okay, if we can just give this particular page to 5% of our visitors, and measure the things that you find important. In this case, mostly the conversion rate for the page. How many people looking at that job will actually click on the apply button. And we finally got to an agreement after a couple of meetings that we could do that. And we went back to our desks and did the most horribly simple version of an A/B test that we could think of. And got that released into production within an hour after the meeting, so that no one could change their mind. And we started looking at what the results were, and they were pretty good. And this is a good example, I think, of how you can approach going into this direction. You don't make it into a huge project. You don't need any fancy tools. You can keep it simple, and you can start with what you have. And as a development team, you actually have a lot, right? For instance, it's great if you have a buy-in of the whole company, and you can discuss what the financial results are of specific features. But usually you won't know that. What you do know is that, well, for instance, if you have a web application, you know how many people are visiting the site. You will know how long they stay. You will definitely track how often that converts into money. So, and sometimes these kind of metrics are only gathered, for instance, by a PO in a tool like Google Analytics. But as a developer, you always have access to these kind of things. It's great if you have analytics set up well, and the information from that is shared with the whole team. If not, perhaps you have something like the Elk stack running, and you can do a few Kibana dashboards, which is what we used for that first A/B test. Or if not, then if you just use the regular command line tools, you can always get to this data, even if it's only running a cron job after each log rotate. The main point is that as a development team, you can start gathering that data, and every time that you do a change, you track what happened. I remember the first time that I started doing this. That was a long time ago. We did a release of a whole new system. It was a replacement of a legacy system, and it went completely smoothly. Well, the second time went completely smoothly, like those things go. And the whole system was running smoothly. There were no errors. We went about our merry way, and actually I felt quite good about myself that we managed to do this. And then 2 weeks later, someone from the marketing department came and said, "Yeah, so we're missing like €100,000. Where did that go?" Oops. So, I had another good look because they had some data on their sales, which I didn't have, and it turned out that there were a couple of product categories which were simply not performing very well. Mostly for that was delivering content for devices. The older devices weren't doing all that well, and looking further into it, it turned out that the devices that weren't doing well were devices that didn't exist according to our system. Long story short, it turned out that someone somewhere recategorized existing devices, gave them new names, and no one told anyone in development, like these things go. And our previous system simply had a default with give them whatever they want. Turned out, by the way, that that default also meant that people were getting stuff that they couldn't use. So we didn't get the full 100,000 back, but we got like 70% of that back. But it really brought home the message to me that if I'm going to be releasing anything, I'd better know beforehand what the commercial situation is, and how to know whether I'm damaging that in any way, because that's not something that you will always see back as an error. And once you do collect that information, you can make it visible. And again, if you have the tooling like analytics or Kibana, you can make a nice little graph of that. But if it's simpler than that and just a spreadsheet with some data, you can at least send that around. The most important thing is that you actually know what you're dealing with business-wise. Oops. So, because the next step is that you actually show off what kind of results you're getting. If you know what you're working on, even if you don't have control about what you're working on, at least you can make it visible that you're making the company money. Now, the easiest way to do that is, for most teams, the demo. Every time that you give a demo to a company, to the rest of your company, you are presenting what you have achieved. And that's great, but it doesn't always happen in a very engaging way. Most of the demos that I see when I join an organization are pretty much just very quickly someone sitting in front of a screen, mumbling and showing the features that were built. Almost, in my experience, apologetic about taking time from their customers and their PO to show these things, because they were finished like 2 days ago. Come on. And if you're really unlucky, someone has it in his mind to go through all the acceptance scenarios for each of the features to show that you really built the whole thing. And then you're sitting there for like an hour looking at a repetition of going through the same functionality again and again and again. That's not what those things are for, right? If you have a PO that only sees what you've built at the time of the demo, fire the PO, because he's not doing his job. If you're giving those kind of demos, you may fire yourself, because it's pretty horrible. So if you do those demos, start talking in the language of the business. If you're, sorry. So if you're lucky, then your PO has already made sure that you get everyone involved in the demo. So it's not just the PO that's there, but there's actually people from the rest of the organization, maybe users, maybe maybe the people in marketing and sales. Preferably, you'll have the whole set. I was at a nice company last year where they structurally invited end users, which were people from way outside the company, to each and every demo. Let's do that. But then when you talk to them in their own terms. So preferably, if you have been working on a specific part of your, I'm talking in terms of websites. It works for everything, but the example is a website. Then you know what part of the site you've worked on, and you can usually the development team knows very well what metrics are important for that part of the site, whether that be conversion rate or retention or other terms, and put those first. So the things we worked on had an impact on our conversion. And then show them this was the state of this page before we started. If you're doing things like continuous delivery, it's very nice to, for instance, as the first part of each story, make sure that there are figures for what the current state is. You build a dashboard, maybe you add some logging, you push it, and you're gathering data before you go into the rest of the story. Presenting experiments is, I'm going to get back to that after this, because usually at the start you'll just be building the features that have been asked. So look at those features, show them, and then show what the state is afterwards. This can be a little painful, so make sure you show something that actually had a positive effect. This is part of the slide set for the demo that I was talking about earlier. And once you have that, you can actually show what the details of the features were and get some feedback from the audience. Now, as I said, in this particular case, there was a new site, a new part of the site that was built, and luckily we could show that there were very positive results to that. But because at that point we didn't have much buy-in from the business, we arranged a special demo where we invited the CEO and all the directors of the marketing and sales. And we had a special little demo to show what we've been doing. And what we've been doing was building a whole lot of stuff, but what was important for them is that they had a huge improve in conversion. At that point, that was only happening for a tiny percentage of the page, 10%, I think. No, 5%. There you go. Graphs are nice. And so we asked them during the demo, okay, so if you see these results, even though we knew that some of them had second thoughts about features that had been removed from that page. Can we increase the amount of users that we give this to? Can we put it? I said, can we put it to 20%? Then one of my developers said, no, higher, higher, because it turned out he'd already pushed the change. So we went to 50%, and we did that actually during the demo. We could we convinced them and immediately take action and show them that if they take a decision quickly, we act on it very quickly. But not yet. Once you've started doing this, you can add the gathering of the metrics earlier in your process. So what we did was we first started gathering the metrics as part of the team. Then we started asking the PO what the metrics were for a specific story. And once this started to get more popular in the rest of the company, we actually asked the PO if every time he would come to us with a story, he could say, okay, this is going to influence these and these metrics. So make it part of the thinking process before it gets into the development team. This is very slowly getting towards something that people call hypothesis-driven development. So you first think about what the consequences will be, but we're taking a few very slow steps, because if you push that on people, like, oh, now PO, yeah, every story that you come to us, we need a business case, basically, and you need to tell us exactly what you expect from the results. Usually they just freak out because they don't have a feeling for what's happening there. You need to develop that slowly, and in this way, you start including it, and you start adding the information to the stories naturally, but you don't force an expected result yet. Though eventually, of course, that's exactly where you want to be. Yeah. So we did this for a couple of months, and during that time, everyone got more comfortable with talking about the metrics and talking about the business results. And the development team especially got very comfortable doing that. So much so, caffeine is not doing its work today. Anyway, so much so that at that point we were still working very much in the business asked and the development team builds way, that the development team started to chafe at that. They wanted to get more control over what they were building, because they were seeing that decisions were being made that got them didn't get them the business results that they thought they could get if they were working on a separate set of business. Each development team usually knows their domain very well. So a web team knows a lot about how people use websites and what could be improved, what technologies could be used to improve it. So they were basically trying to get a bigger say in this, which resulted at some point in a rather intense planning session where the PO suggested, well, the PO asked for a certain feature and the development team said, no, we're not going to do that. Which of course was a bit of a shock. Doesn't happen all that often. But they said, okay, so if we do this, that's not. We were supposed to be, getting a better retention rate, and we were supposed to be increasing the number of searches. If we do this, that's going to be marginal. If you put that effort into that other feature, the one that we talked about a couple of weeks ago that we thought was a good idea, that's going to have a direct effect on how many people get onto the site through Google and look at repeat product views. So why don't we do that? It's pretty much the same effort, and so there was a very intense discussion that happened there. Our PO realized that he was losing control a little, but that discussion did result into a new way of looking at how we were doing our planning. At that point, basically we were doing classical roadmap planning, very close, of course, to what you get with a waterfall approach, except that you spread it out a little bit more. And we decided to get rid of that completely. Instead of working on a set of features, we would define certain goals per period. We took periods of a month for working on specific goals. That didn't work out in the end, but it's a good way to start. And we'd say, okay, so let's see what we're trying to achieve here. And the PO would still do this work. He would go to the rest of the business. He would discuss what the business goals would be in the coming times. And we'd get a list of those. And this was our high-level backlog. These were our epics, if you want. And then for each of those, we would get together with the PO and the whole team and some people in the business that had specific knowledge or interest in these matters. And we would discuss first what exactly it meant to reach that goal. So for instance, well, an example, we want to, we have different ways that people actually get to our products. And one particular way we think is underperforming if you compare it to the rest of the market, so we should be able to improve on that. And that was search. So how can we improve on search so that we get either more searches or mostly more click-throughs to detail pages? So we got a couple of metrics that would prove to us that we were actually improving in that area. And we would do the same for the first couple of items. At a later stage, we actually started thinking about what that meant in money, but that took a long while to land. First of all, we were just still talking in those pirate metrics. And then we would, and this is just one in the same session, we took about 2 hours with the whole crowd, and we would end up with the goals and the metrics and a number of suggested features. So when you look at a specific goal, then there's always a number of features that are interesting. Some of those came from the PO, things he was planning to do anyway. Some of those came from the business people directly, because as you saw in the start, the PO often is a filter, but sometimes he's a filter for things that don't have to be filtered. I can't count the amount of times where I've seen the situation where you finally get to talk to someone that actually is in the business, and where you discover that they've been asking for something for ages, and the answer has always been, no, we can't do that because we have other plans. And that's way too expensive. And then when you get them together with a development team, they can actually, these things are actually not all that hard to do if you actually know the system. So, so we get more ideas out in this way, which is good. Now, for each of the things that we think can possibly increase our results, oops, that was fast. Right. For each of the things that we can possibly think can improve the results, we decide what would be the MVP, the minimal way we could prove that this would actually work. And each of those is an XP story, so we should be able to do that with one pair of developers in 2 days. So we take very small effort to prove that we can actually start working in that direction. And then only then we get to the actual sprint, if you're doing those, and start executing those tests. And then we gather the results. And if we have a positive result, then we start implementing more of that feature. We start iterating on it. If we don't, we simply kill it. Or in this case, switch off or keep the feature toggle switched off and remove the functionality if we need to. And in these kind of cases, you can see, for instance, that if we look at the test with if we have a like this link in an existing detail page, that does not increase the number of searches much, but it has a big effect on the number of detail views. So we keep people looking at we get people looking at more products, which is great. So we're going to continue with that. But if you look at the and if you look at the bottom one, help people search by providing relevant search terms to them, suggesting them. That actually gives us more searches and some increase in details views. So that actually helps people have more relevant searches. That is another area where we can continue. The top one has less of an impact. So I think we're going to get rid of that. Now, going from there, we continued with this company to take some further steps, but not all of those worked. so I'm not gonna bother you with those results. But what I can tell you is that there were some interesting results for the IT department as a whole. Apart from the fact that the developers got much more engaged with the business, got more contact and more respect from the business. The same was true for the development manager. So for him it was a major change going into the quarterly and yearly budget meetings, because where previously all he had to talk about was the ways in which he was reducing cost and managing to keep the systems up and running. Suddenly, when talking about budget and being offered budget cuts for his department, he could offer hard data on, yeah, so these were the costs, these were the profits. Do you really think we need that cut? And that is a very that was a very empowering thing for him to be able to do. Also got him fired. That's the that's the other part of that. As I said, he actually got more budget, and that continued. It means that if you do these things, you run into existing power structures, and that can be dangerous. So if you do those things, be wary of the politics of it. And the next steps for an organization, which, as I was just saying, they didn't do, is to actually start aligning the goals and targets of IT and the business, and start then merging those two into one where you can form actual product teams. That's all I have for you today.